the Force will be with you.
Always.
What is good, everyone? It is your guy, Don James, and welcome back to the 5 Years Later series. If you're new to the channel, I'm doing a series where I break down every billion-dollar film from 2019 to get a sense of how it's aged. So if you're interested in that, well, the series is completed, so you could just watch all of it. And also subscribe in the process. Today we will be talking about Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, no.
Oh, and by the way, yes, it's technically not 2024 anymore. I know that, okay? But hey, at the same time, this movie came out in December of 2019, so as far as I'm concerned, it's still 5 years later until December of 2025. But anyways, I won't waste any more time. Let's get right on into this. So, in 2012, Disney acquired Lucasfilm, and with that, they acquired Star Wars. And soon after that, they announced a trilogy was in the works. So, they hired J.J. Abrams to direct the first film in the trilogy that was released in 2015, Star Wars The Force Awakens, which, by the way, remains to this day the highest grossing domestic film of all time. Oh, and for the dumb ones in the back, I'm not referring to the Democratic Republic of Congo, I'm referring to the US when I say domestic. While reception for The Force Awakens has been altered now, it was well received by fans. Wow, that didn't come out right. It was well received by fans when it first came out, but a big criticism was that it seemed way too derivative of A New Hope, and that likely influenced Disney's decision with the next film in the trilogy, The Last Jedi, directed by Rian Johnson. Now, I'm not really going to go into all that because this is about Rise of Skywalker, but let's just say that The Last Jedi created one of the most intense civil wars in the history of cinematic fandom. And even though Disney probably won't officially admit it, they most likely panicked after the backlash and thus released this glorious dumpster fire known as The Rise of... Anyways, on the topic of Rian Johnson, there were rumors that he would be working on a script for The Rise of Skywalker also, but at least according to him, those rumors weren't true. Instead, the actual director that Disney initially focused on for The Rise of Skywalker was... Wait, what is he doing there? Colin Trevorrow. For much of the development of this movie, the credited director was actually Colin Trevorrow, who you might know for directing the Jurassic World trilogy. And The Rise of Skywalker was initially not actually called The Rise of Skywalker. It was titled Duel of the Fates. Unfortunately, Trevorrow's plan and timeline didn't match up with the infamous top G of Star Wars, Kathleen Kennedy. Thus, 2 years into production, Trevorrow got fired, further indicating just how much of a mess of a process the development of this movie was. But anyways, Disney decided to go with the safe option and have J.J. Abrams return to direct the third movie, and a bunch of script and story changes ensued, though the movie still did ultimately give Trevorrow story credit. When it came to casting, most of it stayed the same as the people that were already in the first two movies, but two iconic Star Wars characters from past films did make their first appearance in this trilogy within this movie, one being Lando Calrissian and the other being Palpatine.
Oh, no.
The actor who played Lando was making his first return back to Star Wars as the character since 1983. Making it one of the longest periods of time between an actor playing the same character. And as for Palpatine, it is generally considered to be J.J. Abrams' idea to make him return in this film. That was not likely part of the initial plan of Colin Trevorrow. And who knows, maybe Palpatine would have appeared earlier in the trilogy had Disney not taken a random detour and abandoned every subplot from the first film just to subvert every... Anyways, the return of the two characters was met with split reaction from fans, which is pretty trademark for Star Wars. But some fans thought that the return of the characters could revive the trilogy and make it more interesting, as well as just simply the nostalgic factor of seeing them back. While others feared that the return of these two characters, especially Palpatine, was a sign that Disney was just desperately scraping for plot points to try enticing the audience. When it came to the music for the film, John Williams returned to compose the film, as he had done with all the films in the Skywalker saga. The movie premiered at the Dolby Theater on December 16th, then released theatrically on December 20th. Oh, and quick fun fact, at the Academy Awards, The Rise of Skywalker received 3 nominations, compared to Endgame that received only 1. Now, I'm not really trying to make any comment there, but that is kind of an interesting fact that I learned while studying this film. So, in one of my prior analyses, I think it was the Lion King one, I said that The Lion King and one other film that wouldn't be named were the two films that I thought had the biggest gap between how they were received in 2019 and then in 2024. And yeah, this was that second movie. I think that so many fans that just hated The Last Jedi so much that they were a little bit more receptive of the nostalgia beats within The Rise of Skywalker. But after 5 years passed and there was more time to think about how this trilogy truly played out, and more information came out about how messy it was, I think the reception nosedived quite dramatically. But let's go through some samples and data. So I started with the usual, where I took the 3 main aggregate websites and pretty much just compiled them together for 2019. So starting with, aw dang it, Bob died? Oh wait, is that Bob? Apparently his name says, Rack. So I guess that's actually not Bob. Oh, there's Bob. Wow, you really kind of, faked me out with your, death. Which, by the way, is something that Rise of Skywalker was infamous for. Fake out deaths. Rotten Tomatoes critics were quite negative on this film, giving it a 51%, which is the lowest score that any Star Wars film, at least in the Skywalker saga, received. As for the audience, they gave the film a 74%. By the way, it was around this time that Rotten Tomatoes introduced the verified rating for audiences, and after that, the aggregate scores for the audience started to shift more positive, and I think you could quite see that with this film. The verified audience score is like 12% higher than the total audience score. When moving over to IMDb, they gave the film a 6.4 out of 10, and when looking at the 10 out of 10s, the 6 out of 10s, and the 1 out of 10s for the user reviews, 15.2% gave it a 10, 7.5% gave it a 6, and 16.3% gave it a 1 out of 10. And Metacritic was quite mixed negative, with a 53% from critics, and the audience was significantly more negative than IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, giving it a flopping 4.5. Not great numbers for Rise of Skywalker here. And that was no surprise. I mean, the Star Wars sequel trilogy had been pretty controversial for a good while at that point, especially after, of course, The Last Jedi. And the way that The Rise of Skywalker seemed to course correct from so many materials kind of just divided both critics and audiences, because critics were actually very positive towards The Last Jedi, not so much with this movie. The realm of YouTube also followed the negative trend for the most part, though there was more positivity towards this movie compared to The Last Jedi, especially from fans who were very disappointed with The Last Jedi. When looking at a sample of YouTubers, I just took 4. I used Sean Chandler, Jeremy Johns, Chris Stuckman, and Shafe. Sean Chandler gave the film a B, Chris Stuckman a C-. Jeremy Johns, he said he won't remember it in T-1. Let's just say he gave it a negative score. And Shafe, yikes! Well, I mean, his title pretty much says it right there, but he gave it a 5 out of 10. So, quite negative from just the sample alone, but I mean, if you really just go deep into most of the Rise of Skywalker reviews on YouTube, you're gonna find mostly negativity, but you will still find more positive reviews than The Last Jedi on YouTube, at least in 2019. Oh, and Cinema Score, the audience gave Rise of Skywalker a B+. So not the most positive, but still leans positive, indicating that at least the audience did like this movie more than The Last Jedi. Now as for 2024, I just took all of the 2024 reviews from Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb because they tend to have like the largest sample of recent reviews just to get a sense of like how the audience feels about it now. On Rotten Tomatoes, for the totality of 2024, there were 141 reviews, and the average score was a 1.91 out of 5. So that pretty much tells you what you need to know about how the audience feels on Rotten Tomatoes. That is a dramatic nosedive from 2019. IMDb had 67 reviews, and their average was a 3.69 out of 10. Again, a horrific score, and that is no surprise at all. I mean, the general fan reception absolutely worsened more and more with years to come, and that began a trend where it became more popular to look upon the prequels with major positivity. Not just Revenge of the Sith, but the entire prequel trilogy, because the hate for the sequel trilogy, for its messiness and clunkiness and each film just seeming to hate the one before it, all of that just kind of made people become more bitter and angry towards what Disney did to Star Wars and look upon the prequels with more grace. And YouTube kind of follows the trend of just negativity towards Rise of Skywalker 5 years later. I mean, you can look at some of the rankings that have been made in 2024 or just showing the entire Skywalker saga, and you'll notice that a good bit of them, especially ones released in 2024, are quite negative. I mean, look at this sample right here of these 4 YouTubers. And these are all pretty major channels with a lot of fans. Chase had this as his least favorite Star Wars movie.
Comparing this movie to The Last Jedi, I think this is a bit worse. Therefore, get in the trash compactor.
Bombtastic also followed that, having it ranked dead last.
First up, we gotta get out of the way. My least favorite Star Wars movie ever made is Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Jedward had the film ranked second to last.
This movie is just rife with problems, but for time's sake, let's move on to the number 10 spot. Coming in at number 10 is, you guessed it, The Rise of Skywalker. This movie is just barely better than The Last Jedi.
And Watch Mojo had the film ranked third to last. And yes, all of them were pretty much negative on the film. Now when you move over to website companies, which I would say represents a little more what critics tend to think, it does slightly change. I mean, for example, there's a sample I have right here of these 4 website companies: Space.com, IGN, BuzzFeed, and GameRant. Space.com had Rise of Skywalker ranked 7 out of 12 movies. IGN had it ranked 11th out of 11. BuzzFeed had it ranked 6 out of 11. And GameRant had it ranked 11 out of 12. So, I mean, half of them were actually pretty negative. But the other half were a little mixed positive, which I'm a little surprised about because it seemed like critics were more negative on the movie than the audience in 2019. And I still think critics are definitely more negative, but there might be a little bit of signs that critics see a little bit more in this film than the general audience that mostly just pretends the sequel trilogy doesn't really exist anymore. So yeah, Rise of Skywalker was really kind of crushed because it just was part of an extremely messy story. It was very clear that Disney really had no clue where the crap they were going when they bought Star Wars. They just wanted popular IPs for the sake of having it, and then they just farted out a random trilogy with a bunch of scattershot pieces just to try making a ton of money. And the strange thing is, while Rise of Skywalker did make $1 billion, it could almost be considered a disappointment. You know what, I should probably hold off on this until I get into the legacy section. I would just say overall, the critics and the audience think this movie is pretty doo-doo in 2024. So anyways, continuing on with what I was saying, I think this film absolutely just got worse over time. And its billions-dollar status could almost be considered, strangely, a disappointment. I mean, the first film made $2 billion. Less than 10 films have accomplished that feat. The second movie didn't make that much, but still made an extremely good sum of money. And the third film, I mean, that literally is supposed to be the culmination of like over 40 years of Star Wars storytelling, and it barely cracked the $1 billion mark. Usually finales are near the highest grossing, but it was like Disney had lost so much trust with the audience that it just seemed like people didn't care to see this movie as much. And given how people seem to react to it 5 years later, doesn't seem like they really missed much. But of all the movies on this list, I really think that The Rise of Skywalker probably had the worst impact on the company that released it. I mean, since then, there has not been a theatrically released Star Wars film from Disney, and there's just generally significantly less excitement overall for anything Star Wars related now. And Rise of Skywalker is probably a pinnacle example of how not to close a trilogy or culminate a franchise. I mean, from unearned fan service, over-reliance on nostalgia, clunky and inconsistent storytelling, plot holes, overstuffed story. I mean, there's just so many things about this film that really just dissatisfied both the people that loved The Last Jedi and hated The Last Jedi. So sometimes it's joked about as the film that kind of united the Star Wars fan base by just pleasing nobody. But the weirdest thing is that this film was released the same year as Endgame. So it's like two side-by-side examples of how to properly culminate a franchise.
Avengers!
Assemble. And I am Iron Man.
And how not to.
And I am all the Iron Man.
Rise of Skywalker.
Endgame had a plan, and they executed carefully on that plan, while Star Wars was just a scattershot mess, just trying to do whatever they thought would make money. And they did make money, not as much as you would expect, but...
What did it cost?
Everything.
And that clip might have summed it up quite well. While there have been some TV shows that Disney has made since then related to Star Wars that people have enjoyed, I don't know if we're ever going to get another film or film trilogy from Disney that really excites or intrigues fans anymore. That might happen, but absolutely Disney completely harmed their reputation badly by what they did with The Rise of Skywalker and the trilogy overall. That is the video. Thank you for watching. I finally completed the 5 years later series. So, gonna be moving on to some new content, and hope you enjoyed the series and you can watch all of it in the playlist. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.